Ignite the spark. We're getting red. Breaking the dark. So raise your voice. Let's get red. Embrace your weird. It's not so bad. Reframe the world in your own style. Keep it real. Let the spirit run wild.
Well, I'm excited. Thank you for joining me. This will be a good time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, I'll walk you through because I know I sent over this stuff. So the idea of this is largely just a fun conversation, because one of the things I think is missing, and this is just my opinion, I think is missing from media is this opportunity to not have hyper curated people, if you know what I mean, like hyper edited, hyper curated. And there's these bubbles that people get into of their brand, right? Like I'll only talk about this part, or only share this thing, or only talk to this crowd. And what I'm really like, and I've always found this to be the case, is human beings are complicated. They're multifaceted. And when you give somebody an opportunity to talk about what's shaped them, what's made them, the good, the bad, and how they've navigated that, right? Like what have they harnessed internally or even externally, but what have they done to figure out who they want to be and how they will live in the world? It's always just fascinating. So so welcome to the first ever episode of Let's Get Rad with Mike Ross. I'm very fortunate to be joined by an excellent human being, a friend, just I think a quite intriguing person. And I'm really looking forward to jumping into a long form conversation. The thing I think that makes guests intriguing here for this show is that they've lived multifaceted lives, that they've had elements of themselves that have come out over time and been persistent over time. Without further ado, I'll let my friend, my first guest, Duffy, introduce himself and just talk a little bit about who you are and the elements of yourself that are core to you at this moment in time.
All right, so yes, my name is John Duffy. Everyone just calls me Duffy because when your name is John, everyone looks for the next best thing. And let's see, who am I? I don't know. I'm working on that. But I guess I tell people when they sort of ask what I'm into, I'm a writer. That's very important to me. I write, I read a lot, and I use that to try to make my writing better. I'm a father, I'm a husband. I am really addicted to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I've been doing that for almost 10 years. And let's see, I don't know, I'm into all sorts of stuff. I guess I describe myself often as just kind of a weirdo. I'm the type of guy who likes to just sit and stare out of windows and think. I think I'm a very introspective person, and I'm not usually the best in big open group settings in a sense of being the big life of the party. I guess maybe that used to be me a long time ago when I was a drinking man, but now I think a little more quiet, and I like to sit back and observe and take things in. And I don't know. I'm kind of, I try to be nice. I think I'm a nice guy.
Yeah, I think, we've known each other now for, I'm guessing 4 years, somewhere in there. And the thing that's always struck me, which is why I when I conceived of this, and I was going through a list of people I'd like to talk to, it's like, Duffy is always, there's just more there, right? Like there's a human being that's got some deep thoughts, got some weird thoughts. It's just interesting. And when your fathers and your kids are hanging out, there's not a whole lot of opportunity for long form philosophical conversation about the nature of reality and human existence and what shapes us. So I'm excited. So you mentioned something, and I think it's always interesting when people move into media for different reasons, right? The creative exploits, from film to music to painting to tattooing to writing, whatever it is. For you, what moved you in your life? Because I know you went to film school and studied film and creativity in that regard. What moved you into the arts to start with?
I think my whole life, I've known that I would be doing something in an artistic realm. That was just apparent to me from the time I was very little. I was the kid who could draw, right? I was the kid who could sit and just crank out drawings of like cartoons and comic book guys and all that stuff from a young age. That were always sort of a cut above the other kids. So I was like, that was my stake. Like being in fourth grade, I was like, I was the kid who could draw. I wasn't good at sports. I was, I guess I was like sort of mediocre at them. I wasn't the kid who like fumbled so hard at sports that he was bullied. I could get by, but really if I was going to be known for a thing, it was my sort of artistic abilities. And that's really what I took tons of joy in growing up, going, elementary school into middle school into high school. Was just, I liked artistic things, whether that was reading comics or anything that had sort of like fantastical art attached to it. So whether that was in reading or animation and film, things that had really cool visuals, and in my own attempts to replicate them, and my own attempts to tell stories too. I mean, even from a very young age, trying to create I always wanted to make comics that like looked like the real thing. And so I had many failures across my kid years, like stapling paper together and stuff like that. Never could figure out how they stapled it right in the middle.
Right. And not cut yourself or poke your, right.
Yeah. But so I just knew from a young time, and even then going into high school, I got into theater, I got into photography. I really liked music, though I was not someone who played an instrument, but I was just always around kids in bands and like kids who skateboarded and kids who, painted and drew and were in plays, made funny short films with home video cameras. That was always my scene. And it's not that like I couldn't handle something academic in a sense of I can learn things and I have, I think, a very good memory for just facts and figures when I hear them. But I just knew there was never going to be a future for me where I sat in an office or I went and did some hard major in college, like math or science. I just knew I would bomb that. I just wouldn't be able to hold my focus. I would get bored. And really, I think I would just get sad. Sitting in one of those situations, I would feel very, sort of the depression setting in. So I knew from a young time, and going into college, I had gotten into like good movies. You start learning when you're like 16 and 17 that there's a difference between something like Independence Day and like A Clockwork Orange. You realize like, whoa, like film is an art form. And I had been in theater and photography, and I don't know, just like I knew a kid who was a year older than me who was like, oh, I'm going to go major in film. And I was like, you can do that? And so I was like, yeah, this seems like a big sort of conglomeration of all these things I'm into. And then I think I got sort of starry-eyed at like age 17, 18, where I was like, whoa, I could end up being famous and making a ton of money, and that seemed cool. And then I went to college and realized like that probably wasn't going to happen, like in the rich and famous part. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed studying film and just making film and like learning. I really enjoyed learning about like the art of cinema and the combination of like the visual element and, you know, the audio element, but also the story element. And I was really fascinated by it all. And I still to this day just love a lot of that. But I had this guy who worked in the editing, the editing studio with, that was one of my college jobs, was working at the editing house in the school. And he was like, he's like, oh, how many people become famous writer directors in Hollywood? Like 10, you know, like how many a year? 4? Like he's like, I'm not gonna be one of those. You're not gonna be one of those. And it was like a real gut check reality. Like,
for the dream.
He's right. I was like, we're these like knucklehead kids from Chicago, the people who get that
Right.
big, huge pinnacle job. There are people who he's like, their dads already work there, their uncles
Right.
already work there, they're already rich, they can afford to go to grad school and do all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's probably all true. And as I was finishing college, I had been reading a lot just in my free time, whether just over summers or weekends, whatever. And I had gotten into good books the way I'd gotten into like good film. I was like, oh, there's a difference between Jurassic Park and like The Stranger or something like that. And I had been diving into all these good books. And I think by the end of college, I thought that if you could write a novel, like a really good, powerful one, it kind of hit me as like, this is an ultimate art form because it is just you doing it. Like film is awesome, but it is so collaborative, right? There's, a major, even a small film is going to be made with, tens of people all working together, doing the different jobs. And it's all those little pieces have to fit together. Writing a book, it's like, it's on you. And you don't need any money to do it. You don't need someone to say like, oh, you're allowed to start. Yeah, you can just sit down at your computer or your notebook or your whatever and go. And if you have it in you, you can complete it on your own. And so that was the challenge. But I also knew at that age, so maybe 22, 23, it's like, I don't really know anything. I haven't lived a life. And so I wanted to go off and live in the world and accumulate stories, accumulate events.
And that's the thing that's really interesting, man. It's always been the piece about you that's just so fascinating is, what I've observed to be true about myself, about others as when I've been doing therapy or whatever it is those who have this creative drive, there is this need to bring those inner worlds into reality. And it's there becomes this realization that narrative is this profound tool for transforming the human mind, for transforming communities, for transforming relationships. And it just is, it's just been so intriguing to me. One of the things that I've always observed is as people develop that knowledge about themselves, it can be alienating, it can be magical. As a person growing up and realizing that you both had talent and you both had vision, and maybe not necessarily the full combination yet, but you had this desire. How did that both give you a sense of self, but also maybe at times isolate you?
Oh, yeah.
That's a deep question.
It is. I mean, you're right. There's something to being a creative person. I don't know what it's like to not be a creative person, right? I've only ever been someone who's always making stuff. That's just what I do. When I was in like deep into skateboarding when I was younger, I started a skateboard deck company so I could put my art on skateboards and then hang out with my homies and make skate videos. When I wanted my first house, I built it, right? I got land in the woods and I built it. When I wanted to make my first podcast, like I started a podcast company and made it. My first film was a documentary that I made with a friend, yes, many other people came in to make sure that thing actually got across the finish line. But I've never not been someone who just like, oh, well, we'll just make that thing. Like there's a thing. Oh, there's a thing that is interesting. Well, let's just make it. And I don't know what it's like to not do that. I guess the isolating part would be number one, anytime you feel a deep creative need, but something blocks you from being able to actually do it, that can be stifling in a way that gives you almost like a sense of longing.
Right.
It's I think the isolating part when it comes to like narrative and storytelling, and this might be a slight shift from your question, but as a writer, I spend a lot of time just needing to be quiet, and a lot of time just needing to like sort of walk around and just like be in the park and look at stuff and just like think, and like that the whole process happens in your head, and everything outside of it can be sort of distracting, I guess, from that process. But that's where real people are and your real relationships are. So you have to spend time out here, and not get so lost in here that you neglect the actual real world. But it does require that one spend a lot of time just being quiet and thinking.
There's a theme I've observed from Clive Barker to other amazing authors, Haruki Murakami. I mean, authors across generations, where they tend to talk about the process of creativity, but writing mainly, as a deeply spiritual process, but also a deeply meditative process, where not just communing with themselves and their ideas, but they're this director of this grand play that they're imagining and they're trying to put together, and that process is so profoundly rewarding. But it can also be really, as you noted, one that you have to kind of step away and engage in and really interact with. Tell me about the things in your life that just allow you to feel connected to your art.
Can you give me a little more on that question?
Yeah. So you mentioned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or other things that allow you to sort of let go and really engage with the physical moment or time at that place. What things in your life, skateboarding, BJJ, whatever it is, that just allow you to take a break from your imagination?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a jiu-jitsu gym 5 or 6 times a week because I teach children's classes. I run some adult classes a couple mornings during the week, and then I go and I attend classes for myself to learn. And I weightlift twice a week. I still get on my skateboard when I can, which isn't nearly as much as maybe I'd like, but I still make time for that every once in a while. But I'm also, I'm a dad, so there's so much time that I just spend, whether it's just like with my daughter in the pool or with my daughter with her music lessons, like, being right there for her while she's learning violin, or whether it's just like walking in the world with her and like talking about stuff and teaching her. And the creative process is interesting because with writing, when I'm deep in a project, like I get up in the morning and I just get right to it, and I give myself a few hours in the morning while my kid's eating, she's waking up, she's eating breakfast, she's getting ready. And that's my time to actually do the physical work of typing things, onto the page. But then sort of your unconscious, I think, is always working. So you get in those moments, maybe those physical moments where maybe I'm teaching a jiu-jitsu class, maybe I'm driving my daughter to her ballet lesson or something like that. That part of the mind is always at work. And then you come back to it, the next day after you've had all these breaks to cook dinner, do the laundry, all the things. and that next step has sort of been written for you by the unconscious mind. It's like you can task it in a certain way, it just knows sort of what you're struggling with or working on. And while your conscious mind goes about and like makes sandwiches and does those things, that little part, wherever it is, deep in the middle, is still like, how about this? And like concocting things. And then it like shows them to you later. It's like, all right, well, what about this? And maybe you like them and you're like, yeah, that's good. Or maybe you're like, no, that won't work. And then it's like, okay, back to the drawing board. So you definitely need something. I mean, look, you can't just for that, your health and sanity, you have to move your body around, right? You can't sit at a computer all the time, even if it's a creative pursuit. I mean, people who are doing, let's say, a boring office job, or they're just doing bureaucratic paperwork all day. Of course, we all would know, like, oh, it's unhealthy just to sit at your computer all day and do that. But even a creative pursuit, if you're doing something you love, writing a screenplay, doing that 8 hours, day after day after day after day, like that'll still have negative ramifications on your psyche and on your body. So you do got to stop, go shake it off, use your arms and legs. But I think that actually helps the process, because it allows the conscious mind to sort of switch off of that task and let the unconscious mind take over. And there's an interplay between the two. The unconscious mind does the dreaming, right? It's the thing that's deeply in touch with whatever it is that is creative. And then the conscious mind is the shaper. It's the thing that says, okay, unconscious mind, those are some good ideas. Some of it's crazy because you don't speak language, but I'm going to take what you thought and turn it into language that other humans can then, digest.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like when we think of creating something in our mind and then turning it into something, and you talked about moments in your life where you've persistently done this, right? And the thing that's always struck me about you, and maybe it's wrong, but that you're a person that takes a lot of pride and self-mastery, right? This ability to take things that you dreamed of, or take things that you're like, wow, that's really intriguing, and either turn it into action or show that you're capable of doing it. Talk to me, and you alluded to this, from sort of skateboard company to writing your first novel. Talk to me about, for you, how important self-mastery has been across your lifespan.
I don't know that I've ever used that phrase, but conceptually, what I think it means is something that, yeah, it's mattered to me, I think, my whole life, and I don't know why. I think I'm, from a young age, could just see the difference in certain kinds of people, and I could see that some people were passive and allowed maybe life to happen to them. And I saw that other people were active and they did what they wanted to do and they made things happen. And it's not always perfect. It doesn't always turn out maybe the way people plan. And for some people, there might even be people who are quite happy in that passive flow of life where they just allow things to happen and they ride the wave and it works out really well. It's not about calling one thing better and the other thing worse, but I just knew I couldn't be one of those people who didn't take the time and the resources, the tools, everything that was available to me, and to not use it. It's an interesting question, but yeah, I don't know if pride plays into it. Maybe it does, but there's something to me about people who can task themselves with something just because it's interesting to them and then become excellent at it. And when you look at things that people create and you see the discipline required to create something wonderful or masterful, that's exciting. That's exciting when you look at someone who's, and it could be anything. Someone could create, whether their mastery is in like computer programming or in like building ham radios or in riding a skateboard, or it doesn't matter what the thing is. You can just tell when someone has achieved high level of greatness in a thing, and you know the work that went into it, and it's so admirable. It's such an admirable quality. We look at these people and we go, wow. And I don't know if I needed people to look at me and say, wow, or if I just knew I couldn't not try, because it's so exciting. It's exciting to try. It's exciting to level up, and I just have the kind of brain that gets intrigued, that goes like, and I don't even know where this comes from, but I have a certain level of self-belief, where I think like there's nothing out there that people can do that I myself cannot do and achieve at if I apply myself. Now, I'll never be a world famous ballerina. I'll never be a world famous skateboarder, but like because I know the time in and the work in that is required, I haven't dedicated myself in those things in a way that would be required for success. But I just know that whatever the thing is I choose, if I want to be awesome at it, I can be with the appropriate amount of work. And there's just something, just so exciting about that. And I don't know, I could never just be a person. I decided this again at a young age, who just worked a job, went home and watched their shows, and just kind of let it all pass me by, because it's just opportunity, right? It's opportunity to live this life in a way that's really maximalized. And there's nothing wrong with watching some TV. There's nothing wrong with just going to your job. I'm not trying to be like mean about those things, but to not grab life by the short and curlies somewhere at something, it's just a waste of your whole existence in my mind.
No, there's some things I've taken away from doing therapy for almost 10 years now. And one of the core pieces has been a lot of realization of the work that Albert Bandura did. And nobody really needs to know about the background of that. But three of the core takeaways, right, was like, okay, if we believe we as human beings are agents of our reality, or are we, right, like we have no free will, right? But if we believe we're agents, there are a couple core elements that really help us maintain our agency. One is self-efficacy, right? That ability to believe in yourself, or say, yeah, this sucks, but I'm going to do it. Two is distress tolerance. So like you can sit with uncomfortable thoughts or feelings. And three is really that cognitive reframing of, right, like, okay, this sucks now, or I'm not as good at this as I'd like to be, but I could get better. When in your life, with your creative exploits, right, from the podcast to the films to anything really, have you felt, man, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to be capable of this? And you've had that sort of internal rodeo, if you will, and you've grappled with it and you said, no, right? Like, this is important to me. I believe I can do this, and I'm going to do this. And it may be uncomfortable right now, but I'm going to push through it. Tell me about how that's impacted you in your life and you've done.
I think the only time I think the only time I've not been able to do what I set out to do were things with film. And that's because of the expense. And there were just I was just out of options, and I just could not find the next way. I just could not find the next possible way to finance something. There's a film I've been working on, even right now, a documentary film that I've been working on since 2020. Sadly, since the end of 2020. And we have a ton of it shot. And I have a friend who's editing it in his free time, which is great because he's doing it for free. He's an editor, but it happens very slowly because it's in his free time. And this is our last push to maybe get the thing actually made. There were multiple possible deals along the way, and there was a lot of different people involved. And for one reason or another, this group fell off. This group said no because they thought that group was on it, whatever. And now it's left in this limbo. And it's actually stressful to me because of the sort of the promises made really to the people involved, to the people who gave us their story and who gave us their time, and our, our statements of like how we were going to make this a thing, how we were going to make it a reality. And if it does not get completed, to me, that feels like a broken promise. And I think that's the thing that hurts me the most about it. The money lost is whatever. I don't care. It's really, the pride around getting it completed. I don't really care about that. I just care that like I told people I would do a thing. I don't like saying I will do a thing and then not doing it. And it's so hard to sometimes explain to people who aren't in that industry. Someone who like sits down and, they've been on camera with you a bunch and like they've seen you going around and shoot. They don't understand like, well, why wouldn't this thing get finished? And they trust you, they believe in you, they open up to you. And if you're just like, but I can't, but it just makes cash. And if at the end of the day, the people who you thought were going to be able to finance it don't do that, it just stops. And that's after you've already had a ton of people work for free to the limit of what you can get out of people for free, So I do lose a little sleep over that. But what I lose sleep over is the fact that I told someone I would do something and they believed in it, and then to disappoint them is what upsets me.
Yeah. And I think you hit on something there in two ways, right? One is the human element of sort of art and film and these things. And if there are stories that are important to shedding light on things or important to shaping communal perspective, particularly when you believe it's the right thing to do, the business of the entertainment world can sometimes be challenging. But then on top of that, right, the underlying piece of when you believe in a project or you believe in this is the story that needs to be told, and hitting that barrier. You hit on this a little bit earlier when you're talking about your time in film school and this realization that there was an industry, right? There was an industry, and dreams and sort of hopes and ideas maybe were a little more complicated. So in some ways, right, the way you perceived the universe and the possibilities you saw within the universe were maybe less accessible without sort of the industry access. How have those moments, right, where you believe something to be true and then you hit a moment and you go, or you've made a promise and right, like you believe it to be the right thing to do, and the financial side or the industry side kind of puts the brakes on it. How have you grappled with that at a human level, right? Like when reality goes, yeah, cool, you believe these things are really important, but over here, this is how it's functioning.
Yeah, when I was in film school, I obviously knew that you don't drive to Hollywood with your new degree and go, I'll be a director now. Like I knew there was always like, well, you go in and you got to start at the bottom and work your way up. But even getting into the bottom was kind of hard. But I did recognize, I was like, that is something I could do, but it would probably be this 20, 30, 40 year journey from the bottom to maybe the middle, maybe the lower upper, if I was lucky. And that it was still going to rely on a lot of luck along the way and a lot of people being willing to give me chances. And the question was, am I willing to live that life that whole time? And I just thought at the time, especially, I thought I wasn't. I was young and I was like, do I want to commit to that kind of grind at 22? No, I actually want to live my life for a while and not just be, starting on something that won't pay off and will only maybe pay off well done. Like, I knew the pitfalls. I was like, look, a lot of people do this. And what happens is you get to this mid-level, you get comfortable, you're out drinking, you're paying your rent, you meet a girl, you have a kid, and then like the dream fades and life becomes just life. And the next thing you know, you're like, hey, I'm a guy and I work at the gear house and I rent out cameras, and hey, I saw Leo DiCaprio once, and like I was like, and maybe that's a good life, but it wasn't. That seemed like the logical outcome was me just finding myself somewhere in the middle. And I was like, that wasn't a ladder I wanted to start climbing. And I lived in Austin, Texas. And in 2009, I started working on another documentary film with my friend Ray. And we had a little bit of money behind it. And we started shooting it. And this is after we'd made our first documentary, which was like a wing and a prayer sort of thing that we never got paid for. And like, I'm working on this second one and we were getting some good things shot. And then I realized, I was like, I'm working as a waiter. That's what I actually do. I have a job as a waiter at the Alamo Draft House, and I make okay money for a service industry guy. And I was like, but I'm putting when I'm taking 2 or 3 weeks off and I'm putting some of my own money into travel, like, is this actually smart? I was like, should I like give up on this? Should I give up on this, dream and just face reality, which is I'm a waiter? Because that's what, how many people do you know who are, I've worked with hundreds of them, great, beautiful, wonderful, talented, intelligent people who wanted to sing, wanted to play music, wanted to write, wanted to make films, wanted to act. But we're all like waiting tables, tending bar. And I've done this with people in Chicago. I've done this with people in Austin. It's, you just start to think like, wow, like maybe the reality is the reality. I'm a waiter. And so maybe the smart thing to do is to just chomp down on what reality is, wait tables like a motherfucker, save a ton of money, and start trying to do something smart with that. And like, I don't know if this is quite answering the question, but I feel like reality did hit me in a certain sense around that time. I was in my late 20s and I had tried lots of stuff. I had tried living in Los Angeles briefly, and I had tried working on like indie stuff. And when I was in LA, I not only tried getting things off the ground, I shot a TV pilot thing that didn't take off. I tried. I went up to like the front gate of one of the studios. I can't remember which one. Like trying to be like, I'm here, hire me. How do I get a PA job? And they're like, yeah, good luck, pal. And I tried lots of stuff. And then being there in Austin, where me and my wife had moved because she also majored in film, and we're like, oh, there's a booming sort of film industry in Texas. Eventually I was like, this isn't happening. I'm doing two things at once, both poorly, right? Like I'm being this waiter guy and then wasting the money to try to be this film guy. And then that's not happening. So now I'm not anything, And so what I sort of like recentered and just was like, all right, I'm going to work. This is my job. That's okay. That's fine. That's what I do. And I'm going to save as much money as I can. And I'm going to buy property, like I'm going to I'm going to swing left here and like get myself grounded in the world in like at least a financially stable way. So, because how many people, I didn't want to be that person who was 40, who was like, no, man, I'm a filmmaker. It's like, dude, you're still waiting the tables and like you put your money into this and it's not happening. And, always trying to get that next chance that's not happening. So sometimes, you do have to just stop and just face what's in front of you and deal with that and get mastery over that, get a handle on that, and like just get your bed made in a certain way so you can then progress.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly it. I mean, I think in that you articulated everything, which is, we can believe all day long that we can do something, and we could be capable of doing it, and we could put the effort in. But if the system itself has barriers, both financial or social or just arbitrary barriers, right? Where you just can't make inroads, then right, your distress has to be able to sit with pushing and pushing and pushing through that, which you articulated. And there becomes a moment where distress and self-efficacy and this mastery, you have to go, okay, I'm not giving up, but I got to reframe and I've got to shift. And what is that going to do? And what do I have to do to allow me to then pivot back and recenter and reorganize? And I think, that's the thing that's always just been so fascinating to me about you is you persistently have this centeredness to you, which I think is both remarkable and contagious in some ways, where I think you're like, yeah, this is John, this is Duffy, this is who I am, and I'm going to do the things I want to do, and that's quite remarkable, and it's I think you just articulated it quite well. One of the things that I find interesting about that sort of experience that you just sort of articulated is sometimes it may happen to somebody as, when they're in grade school, maybe they're into comic books and they get bullied, or it may happen to them, right? Like after they've gone to college and they are like, I'm going to be this. I studied, chemical engineering, and I'm going to go work for, NASA, helping design new fuels, whatever it is. And then reality hits, and it's not necessarily give up, but it's how do you reorganize it? And often what I've observed is sometimes when people aren't able to fully actualize, right? They're not able to get to what their peak dream is sometimes they look for communities where they can find that, right? And often that's subversive communities or communities that are maybe a little different or on the outside a little bit. We're around the same age, and, growing up in the 80s and 90s, many of the things you talked about weren't as popular. How has being on the edges, right? Playing with those subversive fringe groups, music, art, how has that shaped you as a human?
I think I've always, like most people, wanted to fit in, right? People don't want to be excluded. People want the safety and security of a group, of people who care about them. And that doesn't even need to be a big group, but it needs to be something, and this can be sometimes very exploitably dangerous, because people can find themselves in bad groups because they were not allowed for whatever reason. They weren't welcomed into like a primary group. We'll touch on that more in a bit. Me personally, I recognized at some point, and it took me a while, that my whole life I've wanted to fit in, but I've always been a little out, no matter what it was, no matter what group. And like, when you're young and like once like those cliques start happening in like junior high, where you recognize like, wait a minute, like why like, those kids are the cool kids. When like everyone wanted to be with the cool kids, and I was like, look at me, I'm pretty cool. Wait. And like, why don't they want me? This is awkward. I'll just sit with them at lunch and we'll see what happens. No, like, yeah, I'm sure once they hear some of my great jokes. And like so I absolutely found myself, with whatever kids would accept me, which usually were like sort of like art kids or weird kids, like kids who liked Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering or comic books, and then eventually skateboarding and stuff, which like wasn't cool. Like in the 90s, it was seen as, I don't know, in like the prep 90s, like being a skate kid or like into like punk emo music was not cool. But a flip happens, I think, for a lot of people when they're in that high school age, when they go, oh, you won't accept me? Well, fuck you. I won't accept you. Like I'm in my own thing over here, and it's way cooler than your thing. Go screw yourself. And I think I got into, that sort of attitude, which was probably very natural and very common. I do find a bit regrettable now, because I look back and I'm like, everyone is trapped in this narrative world. Everyone is telling themselves a story about themselves. And I wish, and this is just a lesson for life, and I just have to live it now, but I wish I could have had a softer heart back then and been like, not angry, Like, yeah, I'm not being welcomed into this or that crew. And yeah, I'm like over here now, but I still found awesome friends, people who I are super cool, people who I still see and talk to and love to this day. And I wish I could have been less mad that and not felt so rejected. But that happened. And here's the thing, when I got into like skate scenes, like alt music scenes, whatever it was, even there, I still felt not quite in. I was never like the coolest guy in that group. I was never, you know, I always felt like I belonged in many tribes and in none, because I could hang out with really smart people and like sort of in high school, like all the kids who were like really brainy and in like the National Honor Society and the kids who were acing their SATs and going to good colleges. Like I could sit around and talk with them and hang with them and like be friendly with them. And I knew I wasn't really one of them, but then I could go over and I could hang out with like the skate kids, but like sort of like my nerdy edge was like they liked me, but like I was still kind of dorky for them, and like it was weird. I could kind of go and be around a lot of people, but always be feeling not quite one of them. And I imagine this is actually a much more common feeling than I would have figured at that time. You look at other people and you presume they're comfortable in their skin because people are acting all the time and they're telling themselves their stories and they're living out the narrative that they've created for themselves. And so you from the outside often look at them, and sometimes you can look at someone and you're like, that's a poser. But a lot of times you look at people and you're like, man, look at him. He's so happy. Look how happy he is in that group. And look, they're all laughing. They all like him. They're all going to his party. Like, but you don't realize like that guy too also feels in some ways on the outside, some ways a phony. And it took me a long time to reconcile that. And I think there's been an advantage in it, in that because of my never quite feeling at home in any group of people, I've gotten to experience a lot of groups of people, and I've gotten to meet and be fairly close to a lot of people who are very, very different. And, like super leftist anarchist want to burn down the world people who like I've been able to get close to and hang out with and see like a lot of beauty in their humanity. And then otherwise, like way over here, like pretty arch conservative, like the UN's coming to take all our guns. Let's hide with our gold on our farm, sort of weirdos, like in this whole other vein. And I've been able to kind of go and like see their humanity and their beauty. And all of this has been a great gift to me as a writer now. And I think when I said earlier, like I set out at the end of college, and I was like, I gotta go live and collect these stories and just do things so I have something to say, so I can put something out in the world that is worth, other people's time to read. That, in my 22-year-old mind, that was me having cool adventures, like, but really it was just the process of living and getting bounced around. And then now I look back at it and go, oh, I did do that. Even if it wasn't what I thought it would be, I've now been able to have such wide and varied experiences. I've been able to be in really loving, like platonic, even relationships with people. I've been able to be hurt. I've gotten hurt and scorned. I've done things I'm embarrassed about, and I've hurt people accidentally or maybe even intentionally and then later regretted it. And I've run afoul of the law. And yeah, and it was all because I never felt too at home anywhere. Yeah. Never too at home in one group or in one story about myself. Because I think it's probably pretty easy for someone who says, I'm going to be a chemical engineer and create new fuels for NASA. If they believe that, they live it, and they do fit right in, and they do go to the school, and they do fit right in, and they get the job, and they do fit right in, like they will likely stay within those margins. And that's not a bad thing. none of what I say is about condemning anyone else's life, but they will probably stay within that path, and they will know it. They will see that. And like, whereas me, a person like me, who's kind of always a misfit, will get to bounce around and see all of those people.
Right.
And I'll get to take those people in and go, oh, that's what they're like, and I just use that as fodder for trying to write things about human beings that others can read and connect with and maybe grow a little in how they understand what it means to be a human.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful. And in some ways, that's the idea behind this podcast, is to collect human beings, right, in their stories, and just revel in the beauty of humanity, right? Like in the stories that unfold from living. And a few years ago, I was giving a talk, and I made a point, and it's one of the more cogent points I've ever made. But I look back at it, I'm like, wow, that's pretty dang accurate. And I said, people have three stories, and there are varieties of this, but I think in reality, there's three stories. The ones we tell the people around us. This could be our professional colleagues. This could be our neighbors. This could be, right, like the people that may lead us. The ones we tell the people that are closest to us, and those will be varieties of the same story, but right, the group we're in, or our close companions, and then the stories we only tell ourselves. And I think this is a gradated sort of reality, but I think that for most instances I've observed holds to be true, and where I've found people find the most revelation is when they begin to bring those three stories together and feel less like they're disconnected, where they have this reality and this reality and this reality, and they're trying to sort of juggle between them. And the thing that I've always found interesting about people who talk about never quite feeling like they fit, and I was one of those people, is in some ways the world has said, you have to find your in group and your out group, right? Like, this is the world we live in, right? You gotta have it. And this is how you make sense of the world. But in reality, right, people are far more varied and different than that. The thing that's just interesting to me is people like you, I think, historically speaking, would have been shamans. They would have been bards. They would have been these people that took the collective narratives and they put them together because they were able to move through these groups, and that because it is this thing where we don't fully talk about that as part of creativity when kids are growing up, right? We have this media environment of, oh, right, like you just write a comic book, you just draw the pictures. Oh, you just want a video game, you just write the script, you just make the game, right? You want a movie, you just write it, you produce it. And that's sort of, as kids grow up, what they experience and see. But there's this piece, which is, I think, what you just touched on, is really to tell those deep community shaping stories. You have to know what it is to be human, both yourself, be wounded, be injured, injure others emotionally, or sometimes, be on the outside in a way that you regret, or do things that you believe to be so true, and then be wounded and have to grapple with, wow, I was the good person here and I was injured. And I think without those, right, the depth of a story is sometimes lacking, or sometimes not fully articulated for the complexities. Because, right, part of the beauty of writing, and I'm going to ask you about your book here, is the ability to tell stories within stories, right? And know that the reader may come up with an entirely different perception of what you've written than you even thought. So for you, being this person that's just had this really intriguing life, when you sit down to write, and you're in this place now where you have some experiences and some stories, talk to me about your first book and the process that went into it, and how you started to find your voice.
Yeah, so my first book, my first novel, So skipping nonfiction. My first fiction book, my first novel was, it's interesting because it hit me just sort of out of the blue, because it was loosely based on things that had happened in my life and that I'd seen going on with one of my friends. So the book is about these two guys who go on a road trip. The one of them has just lost his brother a year ago to disease, and subsequently lost his girlfriend after that. And he's just in a deep, deep, deep state of grief. And the other man, his friend, invites him on this work road trip because he's trying to give his friend a reason just to get out of the city and to see the world with fresh eyes and maybe find a reason to be happy again. And this is based on something that really happened, in that I did have a friend, a guy I went to high school with, one of those misfit outsider guys who was so funny, like just the funniest dude. He could make you laugh about anything. Some people just have this gift where they can say almost anything, and somehow how they just do it with their body and their voice. You're in stitches, and it's not just your weird interpretation of it. It's like everybody just universally understands this human is hilarious. We had this friend, this guy named Tim, who was that way, and he was a musician. And when he was in his young 30s, he came down with ALS. And my very good friend Adam, who was his cousin. So Tim was the man with ALS. Adam was his cousin, and Adam was also like, and still is, one of my best friends. He's a very talented musician, and very artsy guy. And he took care of his cousin Tim while Tim was degrading neurologically. And he stopped working, quit his job, and was Tim's nurse for half the days of the week. And watching this guy who had basically been his brother growing up, watching him decline and then eventually pass on, broke his heart. It broke it really, really hard. And I'd called him up one day after Tim had passed away. It was maybe a year later. And I was like, hey, how you doing? And he was just down. He was so down. And I was like, let's take a trip, man. I was like, let's pick a spot anywhere. It doesn't even matter where. Let's just pick somewhere neither of us have been. And we randomly picked Duluth, Minnesota. And we have a good friend from high school who lives in Minneapolis. And I was like, dude, we'll drive up. We'll do a big loop. Drive all the way up from Chicago. We'll go to Duluth, hang out, see what's up there, spin back down through Minneapolis. We'll see Steve. His birthday's coming up. And then we'll wing back. And this was just to give my friend something to look forward to. I was like, we'll plan this for a few months out, so he has this thing in his future that he knows will be good and fun. So, and that was just a thing to do with my friend to pick up his spirits. And that then became the genesis of this book idea. And the book goes on, and it's about other things, about stuff we keep buried within us, and secrets we keep buried, and how much we really know a person. And it's about grief, but it's about overcoming grief. But it came from that origin, that true origin. And I was just driving after that trip. It was after we had done that. And I was like, it was all coming together. I don't know, maybe that unconscious mind had taken all these bits of reality. And it's like, oh, we could change it to this, change this. And then, I'll add these superfluous details, this new fictionalized stuff about, a woman they meet and things, all these other events that happen. But that's where it all came from. And I think that's just how it happens. I was very focused on writing. I had been sort of switching gears out of, which I've been trying to do, since I turned 40, was really switching gears into writing. It just felt like time now in my life. I've been working in a lot of podcasting and sort of nonfiction spaces, which are still storytelling and still required. I developed chops in the organization of a story, but I just knew I was now at my time to where I'm going to jump into this whole new era of my life where I am just fully into the creative process, fully in creative control, and doing my best to construct the written word in a way that can be me, my voice, and also hopefully one that people of our generation can connect with and latch onto. Because it's weird. I try to write in a way that is a certain sense taking from the master, right? Like learning from the great writers before us, but also I'm never going to shake like the weirdo skate kid, guy at the dingy punk rock show. I'm never going to shake that. And I don't want to, right? I want to kind of infuse them in a weird way, and Hemingway was never going to shake the fact that he like served in the military and that he was sort of a gruff, sportsman sort of guy. And he was going to infuse everything with that. And I'm not Ernest Hemingway. I'm just coming up with an example. And I was like, but yeah, so I think that my voice tries to be something millennial, right? But not I hope not in a corny way, like in a way that's just, this is the lives that so many of us live,
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think Hemingway's just another profound example of this. And in some ways, I think you've persistently talked about this, which is, there's a process that happens. It's almost like cognitive Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? You're grappling with narratives, you're grappling with ideas, and some of the things that you have to do is be able to shift your perspective from you to the other, or the other actor, or the other person, and place yourself in those shoes to try to both feel or imagine what truths they may have, and the nuances, and that it's not so stark as you're this person, or this is how you're different than me, that there's so much complexity into the human play. And I just find it so fascinating. So one of the things I've always found to be really intriguing about that, and the great writers do this, is they let their weird show in some very subtle ways and sometimes very garish ways. Hermann Hesse was one of my favorites. Steppenwolf is a great example of this, where it's just so bizarre, but it's also such a profound novel. What are some of the weird things about you that like just profoundly strange, weird, like, UAPs, interdimensional travel, time travel? Like what is it? Like what are the wild back and beyond stuff?
Now I feel like I've overstated my claim earlier when I said I was weird. Like, I don't know if I have anything that's that, maybe actually kind of, now I'm like recanting, like maybe I'm just boring after all. I find all that stuff fascinating in a fun way. Like I'm actually, maybe people would be annoyed to find out I'm not like a strict materialist or anything, but I have a strain that like I don't get into too much, like, not in a serious sense, any sort of like woo sort of thing. It's weird because like maybe I'm probably boring and crusty and Midwestern, I guess is really what it is. Like an Irish Catholic kid from Chicago who like is will be like interdimensional, tarot, Wicca, that's a bunch of hogwash. When I'm like, but Jesus. No, that makes sense. No, I have a spiritual part of me, but I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very reticent to put it in any sort of boundary or to put any sort of name on it. And I had another friend pass away just this last year, beginning of January, a musical guy, another outsider, really cool guy, one of my friends from Austin, just a great dude. And he died of cancer. And I was, when you go through things like that, those spiritual elements of you come to the forefront. And anyone who's dealt with loss in that way, and which is pretty much everybody, knows that life changes, at least in the moment, where it very quickly becomes apparent what is important and what is not important. And it's funny because you try to tell yourself, I will never again be overly consumed by the not important. But then it's very easy to slip back in, just because the day to day of paying bills and making sure that clothes are clean and things like that, sort of reassert themselves. That's part of reality. That's the reality we live. We're physical beings and physical bodies that need maintenance, and homes with heating and air conditioning. And so we do have to kind of return to that world of things that seem sort of mundane. But in that moment of loss, of saying goodbye to him, and you feel super connected to something outside of the physical. I very much felt a deep presence of whatever the divine is. And I don't know what that is. I just know that I like being a part of it,
Yeah.
And I left his hospital room after my final goodbye, and I just had to turn the music up. I was in a rental car, I was by myself. I'd flown back to Texas, and my wife knew the man very well, but she couldn't come. She had to stay here with our daughter. And I got on the phone with her, and I walked out the parking lot, called her, and I just wept, and I just wept really hard, one of those outpourings of just soul. And then when I hung up with her, I looked around, and the day was so beautiful. Everything about that it was New Year's Day, or it was New Year's Eve. It was December 31st. And that cool Texas day with the sunshine and clouds. And I got on the highway to head back towards the airport. And I just had to turn the music way up and just sing along. And something so profound came over me that was like singing as an act of prayer. And I felt so just connected to life, and just the beauty of the mystery of it all, and like the heartache, and there's something about how heartache and longing and that pain of loss are the exact same thing as joy. And they are the exact same thing as exuberance and that overwhelming love of life and being alive. And I felt it all, right? You recognize it's one thing with many different, shades and colors. And we might put our attention on one or another in any given moment. We might be feeling just the weight of loss at any given moment. But if you just turn to the right, it magnifies the immense beauty of the miracle in which we exist every day. And so, I think that's me at my sort of weirdest, is I absolutely do feel an acceptance of a belief in whatever that is, of something that is bigger than the material world, that the material world is a piece of. And I just hesitate to try to put any sort of constraint on it after that. I just know it, just like, if you let it, you will feel it. It will animate you. It will come into you. And you will find, you will get moments of lucidity where just you see the resplendent beauty everywhere and in everything. And it's a treasure and it's a joy, and you can't keep it. You can't hold it. You can't walk through, because the laundry's got to get done, the sandwiches got to get made, and you got to, the car needs gas, and you got to go to work, and so you can't always be staring it in the eye. But in those moments, it is there to be found if you will let it look at you, you know.
No, I find that remarkably beautiful and touching. And also, I mean, I think there are some really interesting interpretations across spiritual traditions, because right, my degree was in religious studies. But you know, the thing I've always found interesting is across human traditions, and you go back to shamans, you go back to narrative, there's been this idea of the dweller in the flesh is right, this thing, right? Like, are we a meat satellite? Are we a bone mecca? Whatever it is. But there's this element of us which is incorporeal, right? It's non-tangible, and you know, cognitive neuroscience would say there's no you. It's just, you know, evolutionary processes. I would profoundly disagree with that in so many ways. And I think those who have experienced what you've experienced find these moments of profound transformation. And I would equate it to, right, like cognitive alchemy, these moments of profound internal revelation and transformation where you get to dance with the universe in a way that is much needed. It's not to say, right, like that moment of loss or that moment of pain or suffering is mitigated or not long lasting and impactful across the duration of your life. But it's to say that the beauty of the thing that was, the thing that still is, it is transcendent, and it's right, it's outside of the physical limitations or the bounds of time. And there's something profoundly, I think, beautiful about that. And I think there was something that I, and this is where I just find narrative to be so interesting to me, and imagination, creativity. There was an esoteric, this obscure religious text, and I don't remember if it was in sort of Taoist thought or if it was in early sort of Hermetic Gnostic thought. It was somewhere. It was something weird I read. But essentially, the argument was that which is divine, or that which is whatever it is, right? The living universe, call it whatever. The thing of us that is this infinite ability to create something from nothing, to take something that's just here and turn it into physical reality, or turn it into a story, or turn it into something, or reframe something. But it's also the other side, right? Is the ability to take something and destroy it. It's the ability to take something and corrupt it and pervert it. And I just find it to be so, and you know, there are many people that would call that weird, right? Like, but I think it's profoundly human. And I think it's one of the most central elements to the human journey, to wrestle with that and encounter that and dance with it and run away from it at times. And I think it's profound. I know you've got a second book coming, and I know it, you know, we were chatting a little bit about it before, and it's got some themes you were sort of talking about. How have these experiences shaped sort of your underlying approach to your next story and your writing?
So my second book, which is coming out in December, is one that I liked at first. Like, I just knew I had to write. And it's funny how the unconscious mind works in that way, where just one day it's just like hits me. It's like, oh, and my second one will be this, you know, and then it just starts percolating. It's based a lot off of, again, some of my life experiences, then hyperfictionalized. It's about people living in Phoenix in the mid-aughts, and particularly it follows a young man who had all intention to be a professional skateboarder and was on his way, was talented, and then hits his head. And when he comes out of his medically induced coma, he has vertigo and he has these motion sickness issues. He can't ride a skateboard anymore. He can't even approach anything really high, look over the edge without getting, the spinning. And so it is a book about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we do when that story no longer works. So I think it's actually right up your alley in that way. And what he does, that's sort of the starting point of the book. And what he does is he stays in Arizona and begins to tell himself a new story, or at least tries to find one. And he buys a camera and thinks, oh, I'll be a photographer. I'll be a skate photographer. Like, he wants to stay connected to his people, to his scene. That, and then through just circumstance, he ends up actually becoming a nightlife photographer, and he's hanging out with all these party people in this party scene. And there's a particular young woman who is give me one quick second.
You're all good. You're all good.
So back to it. So there's a particular young woman in it who, she, through his photography, moves up into being sort of like sort of a fixture in the nightlife scene, which boosts her profile until she's this online model. And then she starts dating more and more famous people and like attaching herself to more and more money. And he's sort of in the periphery of her there. And then also dealing with all these other people he's around in this scene who are dealing with some disappointment in their lives, some attempt to realign with reality when their own story didn't pan out. And so it's very much a book about what we tell ourselves about ourselves, and it's set in the desert, and it's, he's lost. I kind of think of it as like a shipwreck story. There's always a shipwreck story on like a desert island, except instead of a desert island, it's more like a desert oasis, ringed by mountains. And I love writing about the West. My first book, they go to South Dakota, and they're in the Badlands, and they're, there's crisscrosses with some like native history. And then in this one, they're in the Southwest. I love writing about the American West. And because so much of that is the great American narrative, like of what we tell ourselves about what this country is. And so that's the story. I mean, that's the jump off point for it. And I wouldn't want to, spoil it, but it's about someone, trying to realign, or at least even taking space to be nothing. Right. I guess it's probably a more accurate way to put it. When the story is gone, the story that you tell yourself about who you are, it can be easy to float in a limbo. And really, I think that's more what he's trying to do. At a loss for who he is, he just tries to be nothing, tries to be nobody, and tries to just be a physical being day in, day out, seeking pleasures, right? Seeking the immediate gratification of his flesh. And because of the true sorrow of loss that he cannot confront. And I guess I'll just stop there. I hope that's a good assessment without spoiling it.
No, it just sounds like a perfect exploration of the things that we've talked about, right? Like, it's this persistent philosophical dilemma within the human species of hedonism versus stoicism, right? Like the corporeal world versus the incorporeal world. I am that, or I am nothing, right? Like, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
That's really what it is. It's a battle between, what are we? Are we animal or are we angel? Right? It's a battle between his conscious, conscience, right? And what he knows to maybe be right and what he desires in a moment. And, in the head injury, he gets sort of plays into that. It's like, does he behave this way because he's
Right.
had an injury, or is this just a person who is battling the battle? That's the battle of the soul. I mean,
Right.
Milton, Dante, everybody writes about this going back, like these, us not understanding what we are. Are we this divine creature that should be following conscience and like denying the flesh? Or is that just a story we told ourselves? And really, you only have so many years and you might as well live them up and have a good time, because you're going to eventually bite it and not be able to. And is that an equally valid thing to tell yourself and way to live? It's this, it's a person caught in that.
I mean, and these are the things, man. Like, these are the things that I see friends, I see humans, I see groups grapple with. And instead of grappling with the unknown, there's sometimes a need, and I get it, both biologically and psychologically and emotionally, to give a known, right? Like, well, it is this or it is that. And there's this, Joseph Campbell had written a book, and the title always sticks with me. It's the outer reaches of inner space. So it's like the farthest reaches of the you that you can go and touch and explore. Like, it's almost right. Like, each one of us is living out our own mythic journey and defining and determining who we are, what we are, or how we exist, and what is reality, and what is the nature of suffering. And it's this thing that I just find profoundly important, to be able to have discussions without saying you're wrong or I'm right, or I'm wrong and you're right. And I think that that's the beauty of art, right? It allows us to play with these truths and play with these things and these needs. And like, you can be an atheist and you can be somebody that finds deep existential beauty in flowers and in nature, but you still find a connection to life and the universe. And there's just these common things that, as a human, it just is persistent. And I think any story that deals with those themes or plays with those is just profoundly interesting and intriguing.
I mean, I'll be a snob, and I'll say that I think or at least they're the only stories I'm really interested in.
Right.
The art that matters is the art that explores these issues of the human heart.
Yeah.
Right? And that is not to say that there's not great work that avoids them, or at least, fun work or interesting work. And we need that too. We do need stuff that just tickles us with a lonely, impulsive delight. But when it comes to the things I'm interested in investing myself into creating, it has to be about living and dying.
Yeah.
It has to be, and what we do with ourselves in the time that we have, and who we are and what we are. And the beautiful thing about art that explores that is it allows us to walk many roads, because we can only really walk one in life. And if people have created very well-made stories that explore these issues, it allows you to send your consciousness into them,
right,
without having to risk sending your actual self into them, your flesh and blood and bone and reputation. And you get to explore issues of the human heart, and it sort of from the safety of this of your room, of your porch. And that to me is the art that matters. It's the art, I think, that lasts. It's the art that will keep with us through the ages. And it's interesting because don't think there will ever be answers to these questions. There will only be new ways of exploring them and new voices,
Right.
Who tell them from a slightly different way to let us think about them from a slightly different perspective. We're never going to have the big answers to these things, but we will be enriched, and we will live. I hope, we will live better, more empathetic lives, richer lives, if we take the time to think these things through and to dance with them, like you said, and to play with them. And I love that you used the word dancing. I mean, my first book is a Ballroom for Ghost Dancing, and there is many, that is a reference, this idea of sort of dancing in the firelight of the caves, because that's really all we can do. There's no going further than that.
Well, and I think you said something that is just, I think perhaps this is where we can find a closing point. Is there's something really interesting to me about how reality can sunder us from being connected to others. So, you can have an experience where you can imagine the adjacent possible, you can dream it to be true, and you can pull it into your reality. And then it can become reality, right? So it was this thing that wasn't real and you pull yourself into it. Or you can have something where you believe something to be true. And I'll use sort of a relationship as an example of this, where you may have a partner, you may be deeply committed, and for whatever reason, something happens and there is discord, and the reality of that relationship is shaped and shifted in such a way, maybe through infidelity or something else, where the reality you believe to be true up to that point is no longer the reality. And then the way you reflect back on the past is forever different. And the way you look at the future is forever different. And I think that art and writing and the ability to imagine these stories creates these ropes, these grappling hooks, these life preservers that can connect people, pull them back into a common shared reality. And that's the thing that I often praise about artists and musicians and anybody that's creative is we're almost like a galaxy, right? We're kind of spiraling out through our lives and we're getting pulled further and further apart. And the beauty about art is it can bring us back together in a way that doesn't say, believe this. It says we've just had this shared experience through this music or through this song or through this movie or through this story. We can connect through that. Mm-hmm. And I just find that profoundly beautiful. Where can people find more about you? Where can people connect to more of your creativity, and where can people get your books?
The best place to get any of my books is straight off of my publisher website, which is picketfire.com. And there's a little shop on there. And there will be a pre-order link for my new book up in November because it comes out in December. My previous book is available there, and that's the best place to get it. But the second best place would be to go to any local bookstore, and to just request it. And they can find it in their system and order it through there. I like what you said about human connection through art, and I think of it as just a way to hold hands.
Yeah.
We come into this world, we are trapped in our own sort of minds and our own isolated sense of self. And the great sort of experiences that people have on like psychedelics, deep meditation, near-death experience, these sort of things bring people to almost universally this understanding that we are all connected, we are all sort of one. This idea of the I is illusory in a sense, but only in a sense, because in our waking reality, it is the reality. We are an I, and we do feel disconnected as we walk in these bodies. And we need, and we will approach our final moments and know, like, it will feel very lonely. This idea that, one day we will die, and we will die alone, and everyone else will be left. And the connection to be able to hold hands first, I think. And especially the cool thing about art is that you can hold hands with strangers, across the world. And because you've been moved by the same thing, it's like looking someone in the eyes. And it's weird when you look someone in the eyes. Our eyes are this incredible thing. And someone is just a body walking through a crowd. But when you stop and if you look them in the eyes, all of a sudden you really recognize, like, I'm looking at another fully living, feeling, longing, believing, human being. And art, it does this cool thing by having read the same words and have had the same feelings, like, evoked in us, by having heard that same piece of music and been really charged up by it in the same way. Like, you get these cool cross-spatial, cross-universe connections that make you understand that you are real, and that help you understand that other people are real in the way that you are, and that allow us to just hold tightly against what otherwise can feel very, like, cold and lonely and scary, So
that's beautiful. I mean, that is beautiful. And it's one of the oldest, in some ways, right? Like, you look at the Bhagavad Gita and you look at Arjuna's journey in that, which is coming to the reality that we're all just this connected thing, and that's the dance of life. Brother, it's been an absolute pleasure. I couldn't have thought of a better guest for my first one.
Did we get rad enough? Was this rad?
Yeah.
I'm like a huge downer at the end. I'm like, we're all gonna die.
No,
and it's going to the cold black of the universe all alone. Might as well rock out first, bro.
we're super nihilist, man. Right? Like, yeah. I mean, I think that, like, the reality of what getting rad is in this essence is I wanted to take some word that I think a generation understood, and attach it to being human and being vulnerable and talking about deep human things, and sometimes uncomfortable things, and sometimes things that we run away from. But talking about it in a way that just creates human connection, and that is getting rad, right? Like, cool. Like, also talking about fun little things, like, right? Like, I love the Lost Boys, right? That I
even the saxophone scene,
dude, right? Like, I don't know if that's like, or like, I make the argument that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is the most existential movie ever made, and that David Duchovny is my spirit animal in the X-Files. But at the end of the day, right? Like, those are, I think, humorous ways to say that the themes and the elements, right? The outsider, the other, the monster that can be a human, right? Like, those things are things that touch us all. And I think we by talking about them together and creating space where people can listen and hear, that's getting rad. So you totally got rad.
I think I think it's great. I think people do need to talk about the stuff that we all, I think, do want to talk about, but maybe feel it's not welcome in most company.
Yeah.
It's because getting vulnerable and talking about, your fears and your great loves and your mistakes and things like that and like what it all means in the grand culmination of what you are as a person is, I think, stuff that people do long to talk about and long to focus on, because we all know, like, whenever a massive tragedy strikes, or even just like a localized, like, family, like, it doesn't matter. We all of a sudden instantly, like, look at each other and recognize we're more than this. We're more than shopping. We're more than the football team we like. And it's not that, again, we don't have to service our material needs, because we do. But I think we just need to come into a better balance where we make sure, and maybe this is just because we're a society that was once very religious in a particular way, and it's no longer religious as much in that way. But we don't want to lose, because there were a lot of things about some of those more traditional religious practices, I think, that a lot of us in modernity just feel are a little antiquated or not as helpful. But that doesn't mean that the core of what was there is unnecessary. And I think we're trying to find our way back to something that makes sense for us now, that gives us what we need in that more spiritual sense.
And I think, right, like, I mean, you look all the way back to Persia, you look all the way back to Mesopotamia, you look to Greece, you look to Rome, you look across, early China, Mongolia, you look to India. Every major place on the planet Earth and every place in between has had these stories that help us understand reality, right? The Anasazi, the Dene, the native peoples of the Americas, they had these rich, beautiful stories. And we as a collective human species on the planet Earth, if we're ever to, I think, become a starfaring civilization, right? If we're ever to meet the promise of what, right, like Star Trek suggests, we have to find these collective narratives again, right? And Greece and Rome would have said, right, like mystery traditions, and we created these pantheons, and we were synthesizing thrice great Hermes and Hermeticism. But there's this complexity in all of it, where you can have all these external groups synthesizing whatever story, but unless that's an organic human story that connects to you at an authentic level, it doesn't matter. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Is the more advanced we become as a species, the smaller the world becomes. The smaller the world becomes, sometimes the greater the resistance is to connecting, right? And the more technology exists, right, we're together, but we're alone. And one of the profound tragedies of being a human being is to feel alone or feel disconnected from others. And, right, like, that's the thing. And if we can find ways to collectively talk about how we are better together, then we will survive as a species. And if we don't, then, right, it's quite a devastating and sad future for us. But I do think that art, creativity, expression is central to that, and particularly narrative. Narrative is probably the most important. Final thoughts, man.
So this is all a big push to say, don't let AI ruin art.
Right, like don't let the overlords that will eventually, right, make profits off of all the small pieces of our data that are collected and aggregated to then tell stories for us and curate our narratives for us, drive our future.
I would hope that we can tell. I think humans can, like, we recognize that stories are not just the pieces they're built out of, and that without the human heart underneath them, they're boring. They're anecdotes with no stakes, And I hope that allows us to keep the AI overlords at bay when it at least comes to the arts and connecting and stuff. But yes, hopefully we got significantly rad. Thank you for having me. And then let's get rad in real life. I see you have a skateboard behind you.
Yeah, I've got the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Santa Cruz, man. You better believe it, because that graphic is too cool to
you gotta protect it. Yeah, that's true.
Old school. Did you get a new hand tattoo?
I've had.
No, the Lotus. Wait, no, I haven't seen that.
Oh, you must have missed it, like when we were swimming and stuff. I got it last, like, January.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, so like when we were like this, I mean, when we were camping, it was pretty dark, so I could see not seeing it then and stuff. So I don't know, maybe when we were, I don't know,
Because you've had the Lotus on your other hand, and maybe I just saw it and was like, oh, whatever. But I didn't realize you got that. That's rad.
Yeah,
Who did it?
Jason at Time and Tide did it.
Okay, yeah. That definitely looks like Jason's line work. So
yeah, and I just did it. Yeah, I saw you post that on Instagram.
It'd fallen out so much that I was just like, I gotta get this reworked. And I was like, well, because we're gonna redo my entire back, so it's gonna be essentially Irizumi the whole way down. So
it's a tough spot there because you get
so much sun, so much movement, so much rub.
Yeah, you get rubbed from your shirts every time you're putting a sweater on. Like you toss, turn, and sleep on like your blankets.
It's like a hand or a finger or a foot in some ways because it's thinner skin.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Jump into the night, let's dive in deep. Stories untold, they're ours to keep. Ontological shocks, ignite the spark. We're getting red, breaking the dark. So raise your voice.